especially early on, of some of the changes that have come about based on our discussions. I've also had a chance to talk to Marvin about the signs. If you recall our last meeting where we had a conversation about signs, and he gave me the kind of direction of how he wants to go. And so, that's all incorporated in here. The hope moving forward is that this is kind of the last planning commission meeting we need to have kind of this one-on-one discussion with. We'll again finalize things. You will all have time. We will get this pushed up onto the city's website with summaries of all these stuff for people to give us some preliminary comment. So we're not going to rush this into hearings or anything like that, but this is the point where hopefully we feel comfortable enough that you're good with the direction that we can show this to people and very specifically highlight the kind of topics that people are going to be interested in. So residents are probably going to be very interested in accessory uses and recreational vehicles. Businesses and realtors and developers are going to be interested in different elements of this. So I will kind of put together a little memo to kind of say, hey, here's some big changes. Go look at these sections so people can kind of get a feel for where these changes are. So I'm just going to walk through here. The first chapter, we didn't have any real changes other than I made a couple little proofreading things. This is the purpose statement. This is all the kind of boilerplate language that applies to entire code. The big thing, particularly because of all the changes we made to the, going from 1 residential district to potentially 4, you're going to have some things that are in the works when this becomes effective. And so this is going to be real critical, particularly to Joshua, and any of the enforcement of what happens to things that are in play at this point. And again, as a reminder, people will have the ability to go forward with whatever code they applied under. So if they applied 2 days before the effective date of this code, they can continue under your current code. They also can opt to go to the new code. They may like the standards better. So they would have that ability to do that.
Say that part again, Wendy, if it's advantageous for them, even though it's not ratified or?
So this only comes into play once this becomes effective. So let's say council adopts it. I think you have that 30-day kind of time period. It becomes effective. This is the planning and zoning code you're working with.
Okay.
If a week before it actually is effective or a month before, when City Council is hearing this, somebody applies for a conditional use or whatever, they can continue to go under the current zoning code. That's generally the common practice. They can also opt to say, hey, wait, I kind of like the way you're doing things now, or maybe they can do things without it being conditional use. They can opt to go to the new one.
Okay. Thank you.
The decision-making review roles and authorities. So there's a couple of changes we made here. City Council, one of the things, if you recall, early on in this process, we were talking about the Downtown Design Review Board. And I asked the question of, down in the future sometime, might you move forward with some version of a historic preservation? Whether that's just having designated local districts and landmarks without the state level, certified local government, where you really have to have a lot of real strong guidelines. You might take that interim step. And if so, how will we incorporate that in? And the idea was that review board would essentially transform into what we're calling now just the design review board. You don't have to call it historic preservation. So for the time being, this code is written that their practice is to continue to review stuff downtown. But should the city decide they want to have local historic districts or maybe work with the state on national designation, they would be the board, and we've included procedures for them to do that, to kind of step in as that review board. In doing so, council actually has the final say in whether or not there's going to be any designation. So we had to adjust that provision to have city council will be making those decisions. General rules for the review boards, these are all the rules that are gonna apply to all of the planning commission, board of zoning appeals. The basic stuff that you set your schedule, how do you appoint a chairperson or vice chair, voting, what's the basic meeting principles, that type of stuff is all within here. Then we get into the planning commission. This is another one where we have a special change for you all. You will now be reviewing conditional uses instead of the Board of Zoning Appeals. That's not a requirement by any state law or anything like that, but it is a fairly common practice across Ohio, and actually a lot of the nation, for communities to have their planning commission review those, because it's kind of uses on a case-by-case basis rather than a variance, because we're saying these uses, like a church or school in a residential district, may be appropriate. We would actually consider it, but we want to have a look at what's the surrounding uses and what are the impacts. So it is different than a variance or an appeal, and so that was one of the other changes, is we've moved the conditional use decision and review to the planning commission. So that's why we have this change here.
Yeah, and that really, just for everybody, just thought that should be something the planning commission should make a decision on versus that board of zoning appeals. Really, truly, because this board would have more of a plan for the city. That's just really just okaying a variance. So that's why a key of taking it to the planning commission. Like say for a school to be somewhere, I don't know that it should go to board of zoning appeals for something like that. It should be a bigger, broader group. That was our opinion on that, so that's why.
And to be honest, I think you're not the only municipality that has made that change recently that I've worked with. And I think, honestly, historically, where this came out of is the model zoning regulations from 1940s or something had that, because currently by state law, in townships and in counties, they are mandated to send conditional uses to the Board of Zoning Appeals. So they don't have this option to send it to their zoning commissions and the like. And I think that was just something that there was a model at some point, and everybody's like, oh, all conditional uses go to the Board of Zoning Appeals.
Right.
And then municipalities started saying, we are saying that the planning commission is kind of set for, plans and thinking ahead and uses, shouldn't they be the ones? So all of this has kind of changed to embrace that. The design review board, so I did have to do some thinking on this to make sure that you would be set up should you want to move this into more historic preservation. So I don't want to say I softened the language. I mean, I gave them, if anything, they have a little bit more teeth downtown, but I softened the language about their focus being on downtown. So you can see in these revisions, I kind of took out a reference to just the owner or property of a downtown business being one that designates. It could be an owner or property. If you do eventually designate one, it could be a property from one of those historic landmarks or one of the historic districts. Part of this is just to have somebody who's got a vested interest in what they're reviewing to be a part of it. So again, the day this goes effective, you don't have any historic landmarks or official historic landmarks of districts, so you would probably move forward with just the downtown owner. We'll talk about the downtown, because one of the questions I originally had was, what is the downtown area that the DRB is reviewing? Is it the whole CBD, or is it something smaller? And that is a question that I have set up for here in one of our next chapters. But other than that, again, other than some minor just wordsmithing and stuff, the roles of the Planning Commission remain the same. The roles of the BZA stay the same, except for those that we just discussed. The review procedures, again, we have a kind of this summary here that we've updated based on our discussions, and we've incorporated the kind of decisions that are made as part of the PUD. Common review requirements. This is Again, this is trying to not create some inconsistencies, so this set of rules is things that apply pretty much, unless specifically exempted, applies to any application. So who has the authority to file, what is in the application, the contents of the application, this is something that staff will set up as a checklist. So if you're filing for zoning compliance review, here's the site plan we need. If you're applying for conditional use, here's the site plan, the numbers, the copies, what has to be on it. We want to see utilities, landscaping, parking, etc. The reason we moved all this out of here, if you don't recall, was it makes it easier to adjust those lists, those checklists, without having to do a zoning amendment. Every time you're like, ooh, you know what I wish? I really wish we had a landscaping plan. Well, then you'd have to change the zoning. Now it becomes more of something that either staff can do, or the planning commission could say, have a meeting and say, this is what we want to see, and kind of build that administratively. Pre-application conferences, we've set up provisions for this, only that if somebody wants to come to talk to you, this is kind of a protection to say, well, they can come talk to you and ask you what you think of a project, but it's not binding on you. So if you say, well, that looks really good, that's not a guarantee that you are gonna vote in favor of them. We have incorporated a summary of the public notice. So there's a difference between the public notice for your meetings. This is a public meeting. You're not having a hearing on anything. Probably the next time I see you as a board will be the adoption hearing, and that will be noticed differently. We're having a conversation about how that's gonna look here offline, but so with this table here summarizes the public notice for public hearings. So we've got zoning amendments, we've got PUD plans, the designation of historic landmarks or districts, and then conditional use, alternative equivalency, and appeals and variances. So here's where I have the first question, because I kind of had this question before and I don't think we answered it, but right now for like your code amendment process, before you have a hearing in front of you or city council, you have 30 days of published notice, which is not a terrible thing. That's giving people a lot of time to notice, but that is more than most communities offer. I would say traditionally most go with 10 to 14 days of published notice. It would be in the paper at least 10 days to basically work weeks, or 14 days. So I wanted to reinsert this question to see how you felt about this. Because even the written notice is 20 days. So you require published notice in the papers even further out. Yeah.
So question about the question. Well, I mean, I understand the question,
Yeah.
but we have, okay, I do the zoning annexation committee for city council.
Mhm.
And when we have our public hearing, we have to give 30-day published notice and send out, mail to the 200, within 200
Correct.
feet. But I also, to let people know ahead of time, usually before I have my first meeting, try to send out 30 days notice, try. But the planning commission has a 14-day notice that they're supposed to give before it even gets to my committee.
Mhm.
So we have two different,
Which is also not kind of how it reads in the current code, just so you know, so.
okay, but that's what I read for the planning commission was
Right.
14 days. So,
So I think this is the time where we have the discussion about what kind of notice you want. Because I'm not saying that you should get rid of 30 days. I'm just saying that is very giving, which is great. But it also, you can be a time when 30 days out, somebody might see that published notice in the paper and then kind of forget about it if they don't put it in there. I'm not saying that's why people do 14 days, but I'm just saying that it stuck out at me as like, well, that's a lot of notice. Especially also now that cities can post to their website as an alternative. sometimes it naturally becomes like, we're gonna set a minimum of 14 days, but as soon as that application, we know that application's the agenda, we're gonna post it. So you could, this is the bare minimum you have to do. You can always go above and beyond it. The only thing I say about going above and beyond is try to be consistent.
Yeah.
So that you're not saying, well, I know this is gonna be controversial, so I'm gonna give extra notice here, but just because I think this other one's gonna be easy, I'm not, because that looks poor. So this is a question of what is the bare minimum the city wants to say, we absolutely will do this, knowing that you can, again, you could make an internal policy that as soon as an application comes in, and you know it's complete, that you're gonna put that up on the website or something like that. Yes.
I'm fine as a planning commission member with 14 days. I don't know how everybody else feels.
I think it's,
I'm good with that.
I think so too.
So 14 days for planning commissions,
Yeah.
okay. And then let's talk about the council committee versus the actual full council in making those decisions. And I guess I should, let me, before I get there, 14 days published, do you want to do consistent 14-day published and written so that like neighbors and adjacent will get 14 days notice with their written notice as well? Because right now that's 20.
Well, let me just add that the mail is very inconsistent. Very. Sometimes it takes a week, sometimes 2 weeks, sometimes, well, let's just leave it at a week or 2 weeks. Has anybody else experienced that?
Yeah,
We've-
we're having that same
All the time.
issue right now in the water department. Bills are going out, and a few times we've been over to the post office and it got better. Found out if someone was going anywhere other than the Philly one, like, we have some accounts, and actually there are landlords that the bill may go to, let's just say Strasburg. Well, if it backtracks and don't go somewhere there, Philly's been the snag, they got it worked out, but yes, is it inconsistent? Horribly inconsistent. I don't know, we had over,
Interesting.
last billing cycle, we have over 75, like I think late charges, which are people that usually aren't, and right, so you know it's, so, and that's been going on now for about 6-7 months, it's been getting better, but what we found is, it's here at the local is what's snagging us all up. If it's anywhere else, if we're sending a bill out somewhere and they're sending it back in, we're not having that, but if it's someone sends it to this post office, then tries to go to us, that's been the weak link that we've found in the last 6 months, dealing with them.
Interesting.
So is it inconsistent? Extremely.
So could we do, so would 14 days published and keeping 20 days written, the mailed notice
Yeah,
work?
that gives an extra 6 days, yeah, that'd probably be.
I mean, yeah, there's gonna be weird exceptions, I'm sure.
Oh,
Something
absolutely.
like that, but
It'd be easier to keep the same.
it's easier to keep it the same. Especially since, actually, it's
Good
almost
point.
easier, especially now that, again, cities are allowed to post to their website. They don't necessarily have to post to general circulation.
Yeah, and I guess to Jan's point,
Oh, good.
we sent it out in 14 days, unfortunately, can't handle the US mail service, right?
Right.
You're right, Jan, good point, just keep it all consistent, the
It'd be a lot
same,
easier.
everything's 14 days. I mean, what's the other members think? That way there's nothing like, oh, like Josh isn't looking like, okay, I had to get this out in 20 days, this is in 14 days.
How about just 20 days?
I'm fine with 14, I mean, I think.
For written,
We've already, what's that?
20 days for
No, we're
published
saying
and
14
written,
for both.
14 and 14.
even though the mail is inconsistent.
Yeah, I think Jan's point is
I'd
that.
say the landlords are probably gonna know something like that's coming down anyway, so.
Well, landlords are the ones that get noticed, not the tenants, unless the landlord's nice enough to tell the tenants, but,
Yeah, we usually don't have that.
no, nobody
And
does.
even at that, if it's 7 days, they still got 7 days to make plan a week ahead of time, even if it's that late.
Well, and we also provide the ability to submit comments written if you couldn't
Can't
make it.
make it.
You're gonna be on
That's
vacation,
right,
okay.
that's right.
When I do notices, I just get proof that I mailed it if they don't get it within that time frame, then the burden of proof's on the post office, in my opinion, that they messed up, not me. I mailed it out over 14 days ahead of time, then
Well, and I'll say 14 days, again, I'm just kind of telling you what the different things are out there. 14 days is still a little bit more than a lot of communities do, because 10, I don't know why 10 is the go-to thing, but like state statutes for townships and counties, I was just looking at this other day, it's 10 days. And I do, as I noted in this thing, 10 days is a common practice. So even at 14 days, you're buying a couple extra days for,
US mail, snail mail.
well, and this is, again, one of the benefits, I think, is, you know, you all have become a little bit more tech savvy with your website. I mean, even I can find out, like, wait, what time was that hearing we had to go to? You know, so if you're regularly, you know, posting, okay, council has these meetings, and you put a note up there, hey, special public hearing come out, people can, you know, subscribe or do that kind of thing. They may tend to get better notice from your website than they do in the mail.
I think, Wendy, that if we're not in violation of anything in 14 days, isn't any violation? I say, I agree with you, Jan, let's keep it both 14 days, stay consistent. That's my opinion of it. But
Okay, I have not changed, just so you know, that's where you can see, even in this table where we based it, you've got, even then, like, the BZA hearings were 14. So, and I think part of it is how it's written in your code is, current code is a little, probably not following what you actually do. All right, so we'll clean that up.
and are you on, what page is that? You on? what
So this is gonna be roughly, page 16, I'm
Okay,
on.
that's what I'm on, I was just looking at zoning map amendment, it says 13 days, that's where you're gonna say, is that the 14 days?
So here, this is where I think there's some confusion about how it's written now. So here's where it says, this right here, you can see me highlight it.
Right.
Publish notice, so written in the paper or on the website's 30.
Okay,
And then the next line is about written notice, which is 20 days. I will highlight this is something that we're gonna be talking to Marvin about. One of the changes we have in written notice is for zoning map amendments that affect more than 10 properties, do not have to have written notice. That's actually, again, another common practice. Because right now, the way it's written, and this is what we're dealing with, and we have brought that up to Marvin, is that if you were to move forward tomorrow with this adoption, you would have to notify everybody where we are going from R to one of the other residential districts, plus everybody within 200 feet of those. So
we have like
this
20,000 letters going out.
this does not accommodate comprehensive updates of your zoning or zoning maps, let alone if somebody was just to have a big project that was going to rezone a whole bunch of properties. So this is a common exception that, again, is allowed by state law, that we've included here, but we're gonna have to figure out how to deal with that. You may get a zoning amendment first before you get this.
Do we want to put some kind of, be a little proactive about emails, more so than snail mail?
So written currently, so currently where the state sunshine laws now allow cities to post published notice on their websites, they do not allow written email via, or written notice via email. It still has to be through the mail. However, again, this is a reminder that this is the bare minimum of what you have to do.
Yeah.
And a lot of communities do have an email kind of notification system. In fact, they'll have something that says, you know, you can sign up for, you know, notice of anything, you know, within the city, or at notice of anything, that it's kind of just a communications effort. You can do that. So I would not add in here that you would have to do it by email, because then you have to make sure, I mean, how do you confirm everybody's email?
I don't
We don't have a
anybody.
city portal. I know a lot of cities tie it to their city
I was gonna
portals.
say, everybody that has
But
an
we don't have
address to the.
Put that on the
Water
list.
utilities.
No, but what I'm saying is there are a lot of communities that have like a email sign up if you want to be notified, and you can do that without it being in here.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's something you definitely can look into, but as far as the minimum requirements, there is no ability to meet any of these requirements via email.
Okay.
Like, go forth and, like, that's a great there are communities that are doing that communication as like the add-on. And you'll see, typically what you'll see is all like news agencies want to have an email notice of anything going to planning commission or council. You'll see interested residents wanting to know, but that gives you a way to say, it's like a subscription to the city's information.
Well, your water billing, I would think you guys would want to go to like an email system on that, because then you have true addresses of everybody.
We've been,
So whoever signs up for that, who's going to get the water bill, has to be sent your water bill via email. So you have an automatic email, so you have an address.
we've been
to-
urging them to do is go direct deposit or direct withdrawal. That's easy.
You can still do that, but still
Yeah.
requiring an email to complete, make sure that this deposit went through, that you're still sending them a receipt.
Yeah. It's been challenging with,
Future reference, because at some point or another, you're gonna have to do something like that.
Yeah, I think part of the issue with this kind of thing is that finding, like, it's easy to go to the auditors and find out who owns that property, and therefore they're the ones that deserve the written notice, versus, my email's not associated with my property ownership, that kind of thing. So how would you go about,
Well, whoever's gonna get the taxes and or your water bill, right there, you're associating it with an address, and you should be able to punch in wherever you're getting that information to from.
yeah, that is probably forthcoming, that's like, hey, well, we know who's paying the water bill, so that's an additional way we can supply notice. I mean, again, you could do that now. You can do anything above and beyond. My point is just be consistent. I've got communities who post signs, and it's not written in the zoning code that they're gonna post a sign, it's just an internal protocol. And anytime there's a zoning map amendment, they put a sign out there that they say, this is when the planning commission hearing is, here's the date, here's the location, see the website for more. But you won't find that in their code, because if, let's say they have a really busy planning commission and all their signs are taken, now they're in violation of their code.
Okay.
All right, speaking of code amendments, so then the rest of this chapter gets into the procedural stuff. Didn't mess around with the actual procedures themselves, change anything much other than notice. However, what we've tried to do is, one, give everybody a step-by-step process of here's how these things happen. And more importantly, for every procedure we have, there's a set of review criteria. So for conditional uses, you will have a set of criteria that you as the planning commission can look at when making your decision on conditional use. Looks at the compatibility of the neighborhood, what are the adjacent uses and intensity. With the zoning map amendments, there's some criteria that you can look at of the changing market, the changing uses around it and those type of things. Just some of those things we'd look at. Conditional uses. I've only added a couple of language here just based on some stuff to kind of make it abundantly clear. So conditional uses will apply, this review that you are now going to start seeing applies obviously for anybody coming forward in the future for a conditional use. If they come in and they want to modify that use or a conditional you be placed on it, they would have to come to you and get approval of it. I've added this in here because the other thing that's going to happen out of all of these revisions we discussed is there's probably going to be a couple of uses out there that exist now, whether they were non-conforming and we've made them maybe a little bit more conforming because now they're conditional use, or they went from being permitted to a conditional use. This line C here basically is like, you don't have to worry about going through. If you've got a use that has become conditional by this amendment, you're essentially deemed an approved conditional use. But from that point moving forward, if you want to change something, you're going to have to come to the planning commission. Now, there aren't a whole bunch of that because we kind of kept track of that, but that's just something to be aware of. This actually came out of this language didn't come out of this discussion, but I'll give you an example of how this happened recently in another community I work with. They had a big commercial property, and it happened to be that a corner, one of the outlots was a corner lot that was completely a parking lot. That's all it was. And there was a little bit of a spiteful argument going between the parking lot owner and the commercial center owner, because they still had their own parking too. And so they thought they would be cute, and they wanted to put a 6-foot fence around that parking lot so they couldn't use it. This is a legitimately true story. And the city was like, oh my gosh, this would not be a good idea. This is right out in the corner, very visible. And I said, well, one, they can't put a 6-foot fence up in the middle of nowhere with not a structure. But the parking lots had become a conditional use just to have a piece of ground be a parking lot. We had made it a conditional use. And so we were like, well, this is how you do it. If they want to do anything, they have to go to the planning commission so they could look at it. That was an example of where, you know, we had made something a conditional use with the amendment. The major change to here is we went from BZA to Planning Commission. You can see all these wonderful review criteria that you can all look at now when considering conditional uses. Variances, the only language, or the only thing you see here is where I ripped out the reference to conditional use. And then we have variance criteria. On use variances, when we first went through this process, I had said, you know, this is something you can allow. Not a huge fan of use variances, but sometimes you have an old school in a residential district that's no longer usable as a school, but not really easy to redesign into housing. So a use variance used to be the way where they could go to the BZA and say, listen, this building, I can use it, but I can't really use it as housing. Can I use it as an office or some low intensity use? And on a case by case basis, you could say yes until that building is destroyed or demolished, and then it's got to be compliant. So originally, that's what we had is if you wanted to use variance, you had to have a pre-existing building. But if you recall later on when we got into discussions of uses and how they're permitted, we added a new use called the adaptive reuse of a pre-existing building that would allow for the same kind of review as a conditional use. So an old industrial building, an old school, some old, you know, this is happening a lot, old schools being redeveloped as multifamily in a single family district or something like that, where you would like to see them maintain that existing building. So because we've now given an out for those pre-existing buildings through that conditional use review, I've struck this language on use variances. So basically, there's no reason you should be asking on a nice pig farm field to be allowed to do commercial uses in a residential district just because you don't want to go through the zoning amendment process. And if it's got a pre-existing building, this is the process you go to. Again, I don't think this is going to be something you're going to see an overwhelming number of, but they're out there. We know, especially in older communities, you've got kind of unusual buildings that probably could be reused. Now, they still have to battle with the state building code if they want to do anything. That's another issue. So use variances come out. Minor subdivisions, this is new to you, but a minor subdivision is where nobody's doing any public improvements. They're splitting a lot into less than 5. It's literally just drawing lines. Staff can now approve this. Anything more, or even if they're doing a lot split, but they have to put in a sewer, it has to go through the entire major improvement or major subdivision process. And this is a question for staff I'll ask later. It's a long process. Subdivision modifications, we have specified this. So as Planning Commission, you will be reviewing these, as you do now, plats for subdivisions. If the applicant comes in and wants to modify a street requirement or some kind of public improvement requirement, they can seek that through you as a subdivision modification. If they want to reduce the lot sizes or do something that is controlled by outside of the subdivision standards, they have to go to Board of Zoning Appeals like a variance. So they would have to show some kind of practical difficulty, which would be challenging. But a modification of improvement or technical standards, you would review as part of that plat review.
Wendy, I got a question for you, because we come across it in a condo area, let's just say they got 12 acres. They can just plot off a piece of it at a time and just keep going, build a couple, and then just keep going. I think what we found out is naturally, just look down the road, 20 years from now, you got 12 acres, used to go into a cornfield. Now you've caught roof water, you've caught all this stuff, so we approved something with the first part as far as in the stormwater. How do we control that as a, you see what I'm getting at? Because, you know, if that was allotment, we'd make them put in a detention pond, make them put in, you know what I mean, and all that stuff. Right now, they're building it for 3 duplexes. But they've got 20 acres that's gonna be 300 in 10 years.
So there's a couple ways you could do this.
Okay.
One is how we define how they can do condominiums. So if they've got a huge property and they're trying to be cute and only do one piece at a time, basically you can say, you know, if you're going to submit that, we want to see the plans for the entire area. And if you're showing a big farm field, we want to see that preserved permanently as farm field. If your plans are that you are going to build condos over 20 years, then we need to plan for that. That's how you would do it with a major subdivision. You may not build every phase
Right.
instantly.
So you handle it in the major subdivision?
I can add some
If you
specific
would,
language, yes.
If you would, because, I mean, we have that now in town, so I'm just thinking out loud as far as that goes, that system where there's storm is insufficient, maybe okay now, but 10 years down the road could be very inadequate. You know what I mean? Just, and then here we are kinda stuck with it. And then we have to try to fix that problem or that issue.
And we've got that other than just condos too. I mean, it's any type of development really.
Well, and some of that could also be built into time limits for construction, which we have kind of put that in here and we can reemphasize it.
Okay,
That basically you, like in phase subdivisions, you have X amount of time to build phase 1. And if you don't, you lose approval, right? That's not really about the situation you're getting into, is that policies change over the years and, you know, we've seen these things where like a PUD plan gets approved and it's approved for eternity, and 15 years later, you're like, that does not work anymore, but
Right.
technically they have the approval. So we've got timelines that if you don't start construction or start, you know, do this, you lose approvals.
okay.
So that's one of the other things we can build in there, is if you know, don't build within, or, you know, do your next phase within a certain amount of time, you lose approval, which then means when they come in to do that next set of condo buildings, now you're subject to whatever the stormwater is then. You know, and same with the subdivision. If you don't build that phase 2, and all of a sudden your stormwater regs change, and you come in and like, oops, I didn't do it, or the economy changed, I wasn't able to get this built. You know, we've
Okay.
gotta keep up. And so some of it could be, again, rephrasing the timeframes, that it's not just about platting a phase. It's whatever is left of the original development.
Okay, okay. Because this group will look at, it's like say loggers, we looked at it in a whole thing,
Yeah.
but when you look at condos, it's just, that's their whole land,
Yeah.
and, you know, now, if this was just all grass, now it's hard surface, now we're taking that somewhere, where you used to just sit out there and leach away in the field.
Yeah.
You know, we just find that, that first system very inadequate.
Well, and I think you're already, even now, I think this would have already put you in a better shape, but I think we can reemphasize that kind of slight difference between a condo development and,
Okay.
I mean, condos are technically just a form of ownership where, yeah, they're kind of skirting certain things.
Yeah.
And we can
Okay.
just rephrase that.
Okay,
Certificate of appropriateness. This one I have not changed other than to, again, make it more flexible that if there's a historic district or historic landmark, they can do, this would be the process by which they would review any changes. So getting away from the downtown focus. Alternative equivalency review. So this will be for planning commission. This is a new procedure for you. This is what we call the positive or happy variance. So if somebody were to come and say, listen, I know I'm required to have this fence or this screening of downtown parking, but I have this great public artist who would like to do some kind of public art instead of landscaping, you would probably say, oh, that's a better solution than what we asked. Right now, they ask for a variance, they have to show a practical difficulty. Well, there's no practical difficulty, they just have a better idea than what we envisioned. This is the out. This says we can go to planning commission for these design aspects and say we've got a better solution than your buffering, your parking, whatever it may. We've limited how they can play it out here, lighting, architecture, landscaping, and parking and architecture, I'm sorry. So they would come to you. If it's related to the downtown architectural standards, they would go to the design review board for the same kind of thing. I see this come into play for things like landscaping, because somebody can come up with a much more creative way that you could argue is much better than what we are requiring them to do. And so we're giving them an out to do something better rather than having to prove a practical difficulty. Are these used a lot? No, but I think I could envision this happening, particularly in downtown, with the architectural standards and the landscaping stuff. So, designation of landmarks and historic districts. This is new. Again, we're not doing any of this right now, but this gives you the procedure. And this is all pretty, best practices of designation. So this is not something that has to go to the planning commission, but the design review board will look at a district or look at a landmark and make a recommendation to council, who then makes the decision. And there is public notice for that to the owners of those properties. Zoning compliance review. We call it zoning compliance review instead of just a permit, because it kind of is going to vary based on if they need building permits or if they don't. This is the equivalent of a quote-unquote zoning permit without it being a formal certificate. And it just goes through the process of how the code administrator will look at things. We also have a caveat in here that if you're doing a development where there's no subdivision, but you have to put in a sewer or water or some kind of infrastructure, you're still subject to the public improvement plans. So you still have to do some parts of subdivision. You still have to go to planning commission and council to look at those improvements to make sure they're up to par with the city standards.
Wendy,
Yes.
I noticed, and this is just wordsmithing, but we don't have a city engineer per se. We did at one point, and they're going to take it to a consultant anyway.
Uh-huh.
But maybe just add and/or service director?
So I've already kind of got you ahead of you on that. So in the definition of city engineer, it's the city engineer or, a designate. So it could be them, or I also include, it could be a consulting company.
Okay.
Because you actually are not, there's a lot of communities out there now that send off some of their engineering, a lot of their engineering consulting. So we have defined the city engineer more like the person who is responsible for approving engineering stuff, not so much a formal step. It's the same reason why we use the term code administrator rather than a formal job title, because then it could be the safety service director. It could be anybody on depending on what staffing you have. So we've tried to avoid tying these to a specific job title. The safety service director does come up to play in a couple of things, as they would naturally. But yeah, so I'm already a little bit ahead of that one. Administrator waivers, we have built in the ability for the code administrator to give some small variances of, I think, 10% on a dimensional thing. So like a side yard setback, if there's an unusual lot, they wouldn't necessarily have to go to the BZA. they still have to show a practical difficulty. So if you've got a quirky lot that's more triangular and the square house kind of nips into the setback, as long as they can demonstrate the same kind of practical difficulty as a variance, staff can approve it, as long as it doesn't go over 10% the requirement. If it goes over it, you have to go to the BZA for a variance. We have also, this one provision here is, we've made an adjustment that if it's one of those things that maybe the code administrator's not clear that there is a justification for it, they can send it to the Board of Zoning Appeals for a full variance. Appeals, nothing really changed here. Interpretation of the code, that's all good. All right,
Wendy, one
Yes.
question.
yes,
On the administrative decisions
yes,
and 10%, so is this, what you're saying then is, if they can show the hardship,
Yeah.
whichever way you want to say it, so that would give the ability, that lot coverage is 33%, and they need lot coverage of 36%, because that's the 3%, or the?
No.
or the 10 or the- okay, what's that? Okay.
yes. So it's more,
10%.
it's tied to the area dimensional, which we've defined as like an
Okay.
actual dimension. So let's say the setback is 5 feet, and because of some weird situation, they literally need to go in like 2 inches or 3 inches.
Okay.
Instead of saying you have to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals for that little nip, because you've got some weird lot situation, staff can approve it.
Gotcha.
But when you have a percentage-based coverage and stuff like that, that percentage does not
Okay,
count you.
all right, thank you.
Yeah, no, you aren't gonna go from 33 to 43.
Okay, 36, okay, that's what I was getting.
That's
at.
a very good question, no.
Okay.
And actually, one, I'm gonna probably go make sure that you don't interpret it that way.
Yes, please do that. So what you're saying is 5 foot 60 inches, you can make a variance up to 6, or not a variance, you can make the call on 6 inches.
Yes,
Gotcha.
yeah.
Okay,
So this is, a lot of communities are doing this because a lot of those very minor ones are usually residents who are, either you look at it and you go, you're just asking for 6 inches because it's not convenient for you. All right, well then no. And then their recourse is appeal it to the BZA. So they still go to the BZA.
right.
But for the most part, it's probably something weird. There's an easement, there was something that is blocking something. So we're just giving staff a little bit more flexibility with that.
Okay.
All right,
Did we leave the side setback at 5 feet?
yes. We'll talk about that, yeah, we'll get to that
Okay,
next,
that's
yeah.
coming up, Okay.
Zoning districts, so this is one where the biggest change is to the residential. We went from 1 residential district to 4. And I'm gonna bring up the zoning map here next so that we can kind of look at that and have any comments. But other than that, with the non-residential districts, they largely align with your office district became what we call the office transitional district, because that's really what it is. The type 2B district, whatever it was, becomes your neighborhood business district. All the stuff out by the interstate will be regional. Central business became central business. Your industrial is industrial. The new districts we have beyond residential are the public facilities district. So that is gonna be for city hall, for the airport, for the hospital, for big school campuses. So they're on zoning map, you can see it, but also that, they've got kind of special provisions to buffering that are gonna be different than, a lot of them are zoned residential now. So it kind of acknowledges those public facilities. So MS Consultants, who I've been working with on this, I gave them some direction. I said, okay, here's the current zoning map. Make me a new one. And this is kind of what we came up with, and I can plot something out if you don't have a plotter so that you can look more closely at this. I think staff is probably gonna have some finessing. But I thought I would kind of walk you through the thought process that I shared with them. So if you recall, your current R district allows 1 and 2 family by right. And then multifamily is a conditional use. That area we have now largely made what we call R2. So the older neighborhoods that are a little bit more mix of 1 and 2 family, that are on smaller lots, that are closer to town, that is this kind of darker yellow you can see where you have the predominant grid network here. Your newer subdivisions that are all single family become R1. So this district now is your single family residential district. You don't have a lot of them yet because when we kind of looked at the auditor's information and looked at kind of the makeup of the lots, you know, you've had a long-standing relationship with that current R district that allows for a mix. It was hard to like not make a lot of non-conforming uses. So this may shift a little bit depending, you know, some of this area, you know, I went back and forth on like this southern area, whether that should be R1 or R2. But definitely your older neighborhoods would become R2. And then in the course of our discussion about zoning districts, and I think when Michael was here, we talked about an area that builds off of that around downtown. I think we kind of called it the donut area. Where things like townhouses or a little bit heavier density could be appropriate because it's walkable to downtown. It kind of builds into that downtown scale. And so we created that district, and that, I'm going to zoom in here. I'm not used to using this version of it.
Oh, it's old, yeah.
Yeah, it's this golden area, so you can see it's kind of just a couple of blocks around downtown and the commercial districts. And these are probably some of the areas that would also be good for redevelopment. But this would allow for, not for big apartment complexes or big apartment buildings, but would allow for some, I think we did 8 units per acre. Like, so if somebody wanted to do a townhouse or a row house or 8 units per acre, I know probably sounds scary compared to what you have, but is actually your downtown, if you had multifamily up above your housing, would probably be close to 20, just to give you an idea of scale. So 8 units per acre is a kind of a soft density. But you can see we've just used this to more serve as a transitional buffer as well as kind of building the density around your commercial areas to hopefully kind of support that. So that is a big new one. The R4 is meant to be your apartment buildings, your things. Now, I have not put that on the zoning map, in part because right now they are already presumed to be conditionally approved in the current zoning, and they're already kind of accommodated. But I think one of the things, if you're okay with it, is I will work particularly with Joshua to see if there's any ones in specific that we want to go ahead and rezone to R4. But we would not be planning to zone any vacant lots R4 at this point. So moving forward, if somebody wants to do an apartment building or an apartment complex that doesn't fit within this, they would have to come to the planning commission and council for a zoning amendment. Yes?
What's the dark red?
So the dark red is the regional, that is essentially your business district now, the B district.
That's where I live.
So this is where we have to
Northwest.
fine tune.
Northwest.
We're,
Keep going. It's a dark red. There's a yellow line right through the middle of it.
here?
Yeah, that's mostly
That's
residential.
out by the,
That's out by the highway. This
That's
is
the-
this is
yeah.
Menards right here.
Oh, okay. All right,
Yeah,
I was thinking
so-
that was Tuscarawas
you're in
Avenue.
yellow.
Yeah. So I
Okay.
do have to, this is where I can show you that I have to have some work with MS
Okay, never
Consultants.
mind.
This is, this yellow, they're working on fixing, and this yellow, it's the auditor's map, they're right away.
Oh,
But for
okay.
some reason, the auditor is classified it as residential, so they were like, oh, that must be, and I was like, no, we're gonna fix
Yeah.
this. No, this is, here, let me zoom in, it might help you see it, it's kinda hard to see it.
No, I got it
Yeah.
now. I see where Tuscarawas Avenue is now. Okay, got it.
So that, that's like one of the biggest change, so.
Okay, that's
And
good.
then you can see, So other than that, like all industrial stays industrial, we're not trying to rezone people. The only, with the exception of, you can see the airport, the campus, a lot of the big schools and parks are public facilities. So that light blue are major public facilities. Now, did we go through and zone all the churches' public facilities? No. And that doesn't mean they're not allowed, because we've allowed for churches and schools in residential districts. If they want to be, I mean, they can come in and ask for the zoning amendment, but for the time being, for the ease of this and not trying to rezone everybody, we have focused on city-owned, school-owned, and like public facilities. And then finally, we have the dark blue here, which is the central business district. Now, this brings the questions I have for you today, the big policy questions. That's a lot of central business district. And that's not a bad thing, because we allow for a broad mix of uses. However, it raises the question of downtown design review. Now, if you'll recall, the architectural standards I won't call them standards, the guidelines they have now, the soft guidelines they have now, and the slightly stronger standards we have in the draft are really focused about the commercial stuff you have going on like the main streets, the main corridors. But up in these corners, you actually have some single-family homes, some office kind of things. Here's my question to you. If somebody was to tear that building down and want to rebuild a similar building, maybe a new one, is that where you're going to do the architectural review and have them look like the main streets, so you're trying to get that main street feel everywhere? Or do we need to have, what I have proposed in this draft is a downtown design overview, or overlay, in which case we might say, like this, it's kind of, you can't, this, like the overlay are like the 2 blocks up from each of the main streets.
Quadrants.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or maybe, we kind of adjust it based on what's on the ground. We still could have some architectural standards for things that rebuild in CBD, but maybe they don't have to go to the DRB, because they're not quite as visible.
Right.
So that's the only reason why, and we had kind of talked about it vaguely, but we didn't kind of hone in on it. So I want to put that out to you. One of the things we'll do here, I can do before this week, is we still need to send, I wanted to get this revised before we send it to the design review board. We can kind of pose that question to them as well, but I wanted to see how you felt about that.
I know that when we talked about that, Tom Strickland had come before, and he talked about an overlay district, because he's in one of those historical homes, I guess, on maybe Fair Avenue,
Yeah.
West. So Tom, I know, had talked about that
Yeah.
overlay, but I don't know if he's come to one since then, but I know that was his big thing. As far as in that area, like if you rebuild it, having some of that, architectural design or something to it. So
Well, and there's so again, we could have architectural design that applies to all of the downtown, don't get me wrong. But the question is, are we holding this back quadrant that has some single-family structures, or maybe they're not single-family, I didn't look the actual uses, but they look like a house.
Right.
Are we gonna hold them to the same standards as what you would in the main square? Yes.
So the other option would be to make the downtown designated area smaller.
Correct. We could say, this area here really probably shouldn't be central business, because we want to focus our businesses in certain areas. So maybe these 2 blocks, maybe it shrinks a little bit and they become R3 or R2. So that is the opposite question is the central business district, when you think about the central business district, is the zoning too big?
I think they originally meant, the way it's written now is after those houses were gone, they would be replaced with business buildings. So if we're not gonna expand our business buildings to make the downtown bigger, then I would say we shrink it, the zoning, unless that's what we want. Eventually, when those houses go, that they have to be buildings.
Well, and so this is where the vision comes out, and part of it is the master plan discussion, because it also isn't that we necessarily have to say those have to be residential then. you've got this area here, which is the office transitional district. And there's a little residential in there, and there's a little, you know, we've got homes that have transitioned to offices. You know, that could be an area where you say, listen, those homes, even if they are rebuilt, it would be okay for them to be rebuilt to look smaller than the side-to-side buildings you have in the core of downtown. So you could make this a different, you could make this office transitional, again, to serve as kind of a similar situation that, okay, maybe they become businesses, but they don't necessarily have to look the same as the businesses downtown, where you have that very urban look. So that's the big policy question I have. Yeah.
Okay, looking at this, I see the square, and this is just an idea, trim it down to,
I'm gonna pull a Google Earth up here
okay,
to help us look at it without the zoning on it.
trim it down to the 4 quadrants around the square.
That may be a little too tight.
Do you think it's too tight? Okay.
Yeah.
I was not suggesting that I should have probably tried to draw what I thought in my mind. There we
We,
go. I love
we
that.
need to have more people living in the downtown area,
Right.
because that's how you support downtown businesses.
So here we have 1, 2, you know, so you've got like some mixes, you know, but you've got a big drug, you know, this in here as well. But you've obviously got, I mean, the main High Street here almost does go along with the zoning map. So this is probably true through here. I think the question, and I can fine tune this based on kind of comparing what's in place versus, again, so we're not trying to create nonconformities. But again, I think the question becomes, when you look at the character of this area that's in blue, what area do you envision being that downtown, like these full-on commercial buildings with maybe office or residential, the mixed use on top, versus it could be residential or it could be this office transitional that you have further down. And again, I think most of the main, High and Main would probably still remain CBD. I think there's questions, fine tuning the areas on these back 6 blocks here and maybe kind of some of these blocks.
Wendy, can you go back to the Google Earth, tell us exactly where that is? 'Cause I'm kind of,
Yes.
the street coming one way. and the
So
street coming
High
the other way.
Street, yeah, I should have had them
It
put
looks
some.
like central, if those are the schools in that
I
light
use
blue,
this
so
way.
that's
Yeah.
central.
Yeah, Central, the high school.
Yeah, so, oops, too much going back and forth here. Okay, so here we have the center of the block where it says New Philadelphia.
Mhm.
So you can almost, it goes, Fair Avenue is right here,
Right.
and then there's Ray.
Mhm.
And then it kind of goes over similarly here to Second and then Third,
Right?
right?
And you're
So-
thinking about carving out what, maybe?
So here's a really good example here. So we've got Third and High here, Third and Second. You can see, we've got buildings, maybe they're not all quite up to the front, but you've got those commercial downtown
Yeah.
fields, right? But then you go, these 4 blocks right here, with all this housing, are in the central business district.
Which
Well-
the only one that,
It's not all 4 of them. So no, it actually, somebody has adjusted it at least. So it does include Wells Fargo, so that's probably a good border. But then when you get up here, these 2 blocks, up to, I think are in it. No, there's no.
Central, no, yeah.
It might be there might be just a couple of blocks that there's a question here.
Well,
So
on the
it goes
north
back-
side of Ray, in between the schools, is all residential,
They shouldn't go past Ray Avenue.
but that's already like that on the map.
Yeah.
If you're going up,
So this block right here with the Lion Sharpening Services and all these homes here, this is all zoned central business district.
Right.
And then we've got, I think this is probably a church.
yeah, drug
So-
mart,
Right, so this is not, this is residentially zoned. So you've kind of got these quirky boundaries that somebody probably just squared it off because it looked like it made sense.
A couple of those houses on Fair are businesses though, that still look like the Kaufman Realty, for example, and, but that's pretty much the edge of.
well, across the street, you gotta remember, you got,
It's a title office.
yeah, and then beside that, across the alley, there's a business, and then you got the dentist, which will be going out, but then you also have a beauty shop.
That could go to office transitional, cause those
Well,
are
that's
all
what I'm saying. So
offices.
this, yeah, I'm gonna go down here to, so we've
Yeah,
got
there
these
you go.
homes. These are all central business district. Now, we could leave them as central business district.
Well, yeah, the one you're on right there is an
This
office.
is the attorney's office.
It's
Yeah.
the attorney's office, not that one, but the one down.
Yeah,
Yeah,
And you got Edward Jones.
yeah.
yep, and then that, what, red brick to the right, that's the
Yeah.
attorney's office.
So here's the question. This entire block is central business district. Now, you could say, long-term, we would like this. You know, we would like this continuation of this. Now, this is also allowed in the office transition district, this
Okay.
kind of mixed use.
Okay.
So you could say, here's the thing. If they tear these houses down, their only option is to be able to build under central business district. And currently, under our draft, those architectural design guidelines that we've got.
I see. what
And they
you're
would have to go to design review board. What I'm asking is this so close to downtown that you think that's necessary? Or is this something where you say, you know what, these are actually pretty nice houses. I would prefer to make those office transitional, to give them the option to remain a house or to have an attorney's office or, you know, that kind of thing, but not make them subject.
To all that.
Right.
I get
Yeah.
you. I'm okay. I mean, that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I'm okay with that too.
Jumping
And
through all
we
those
could do
hoops
the
for that.
overlay to designate the area that the design board
Well,
jurisdiction.
so
Is
I
that what
think,
you're thinking?
no, I think that's the question, is if we reduce the central business district area, so let's say we make that little housing area we just saw office transitional,
Mhm.
then we might drop the need for an overlay and then say the reduced central business district
So
is
it
where.
would be on the
Actually,
east side of Third Street,
yeah, and actually what that's doing is it's insulating it from that
or,
board.
Right.
Second Street.
Right. I agree with that.
Yeah.
Insulating it from that
I-
board.
And it's nothing against the board, to be honest.
No, I'm not saying that either, but it's
No.
just,
But you have a lot, so again, right now, this is what generated all this discussion. Right now, you say the design review board basically reviews anything in quote, the downtown area. And I asked the question, what is the downtown
downtown
area?
area, yeah, right.
And I think the response was something that could be paraphrased as, we would know it if we see it. And so then we led the question, okay, is there control over everything in the blue? Or is this an area where we probably should be finessing things with saying, we really want that up to the sidewalk, two-story buildings that you have on Main and High, on High Street, we want that to be the main here and maybe on some of the side streets. But like this little corner might be office transitional or something like that.
Yeah, and then when I say insulated, I just mean, if I went in there and bought that house and did that other, I shouldn't say this because I'm in that line of work, but another layer of bureaucracy,
Yes.
no, I don't believe, no.
Well, and on top of that, some of that housing is nice. It's in
Right.
really nice condition.
Yeah,
So
that's
it's
what-
like,
yeah, absolutely,
why not give them the flexibility?
right,
And not say you have to tear, because those homes would not meet the standards the architectural standards we have for downtown.
right. I don't think they necessarily have to.
Okay. Then if you don't mind with that guidance, unless anybody has an objection, I will work with the mayor and with Joshua to refine this. And what I can do is then I can kind of do a little sample map that says, here's where your CBD is now, here is what we're proposing, and kind of send that out. I'll do it on a little clearer background so you can see what's underneath it.
Yeah, that'd be good.
But if we do it that way, then I don't think we need that overlay district. Then it just becomes central business district. However, not to drop the question of the overlay district, one of the vague discussions we had with Michael, who's been working on your master plan, is, I think the West High
West
overlay.
High corridor overlay.
And whether or not there's two options for how we do this, because one of it was, we'd like to have some more uniform appearance. So there's two ways we can do this. We can have an overlay district that says, regardless of what the base zoning district is, regional, office transitional, or this neighborhood business, the pink, anything along that corridor, we would like to be close to the street, so we could have a maximum setback. So no buildings can be all the way in the back of their lot. Does it have to be up front like central business? No. But, maybe you only have a row of parking in the front, just to narrow that field. And then maybe we have a little bit stronger landscaping requirements along the front, because as you had all mentioned, that right of way, unless you all go in and do some beautification, like a streetscape or something, is probably not gonna happen on its own. So we could do some things where we require front yard landscaping or parking lot landscaping in this corridor that would be a little different than what the other areas of businesses would have to have. Again, to create a uniform feel through the zoning. Does that put a little bit of an extra requirement on them? Yes, but I think the direction we kind of heard was, maybe it's not a ton, it's not like we're gonna force them through architectural site plan review, but maybe we can get a few more trees and shrubs in there to soften that corridor.
As
So,
it is the gateway into the center of town. West High, you're talking West
Yeah.
High?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah, if you wanna change the look, we have to put something on it
Yeah.
to over time eventually change it.
well, the only other way, I think as we had discussed on the phone, I think I was virtual of this, the only other way is that you all invest in a streetscaping and you do it in the public right of way. Could you do it in the future? I think that would be ideal. But this isn't an area where you're gonna see future subdivisions, that you could force them to do something, in the right of way. And so the only other way is to look at it as, I think it's the vape shop, I might have a picture of it with all their little banner signs, all their flag signs. Maybe that's not an area that those types of signs are appropriate. So that's something I can look into if it's just more about the appearance. Again, not trying to be super burdensome, we're not gonna have them put in 300 trees, but we can have them do an extra streetscape buffer to put in something that might look like a tree lawn, but it'll be on their private property.
yeah, works for me.
And in your mind, is that something, so I heard from downtown to the railroad, or do you think that is really all the way out to the big commercial district, or is it all the way out to the highway?
I think myself, as we could have picked some of this stuff off its place, stuff that we've added since then, just like say we'd have had like Aldi's do that, say we would have had the oil shop that just come in and do that, say we'd had Verizon do that, it already would start looking better. So I think we need to do it, my opinion, is the entire way.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially
I
with a
agree with
project
that.
going on
What's
where it's
everybody
gonna
else think?
be redesigned anyhow.
You guys are, come on, wake up.
I swear this is the only big policy question I have
Yeah.
left in this, because it came up in the midst of our discussions.
Well, I mean, the only thing, like on West High, we put the turn lane in, so there is no curb strip. I mean, right,
Well, we're making them do that on their property.
Yeah,
right behind the wall.
yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Because there is no ability to put in
Yeah.
street trees. So what it would basically say is, because we have areas outside of this corridor that are this red regional business, what we would be saying is, red regional business, we actually, we have landscaping requirements for that area that abuts residential. And we've got some if you've got a huge parking lot, but we don't have a lot of real we don't have a lot of landscaping requirements for you. It's really buffering. What we would be saying is, in this area though, along this particular overlay, regardless of what that red says you have to do. We want you to put one tree for every 50 feet or every 20 feet in your front yard or between your parking and your street. So it will be on private property, but it will
It'll
give
improve
the
look.
appearance of a corridor treatment.
And just to throw out there, that Take 5 oil change actually had that conversation, making sure we don't require any landscaping, or else that would have been one property that already had it done.
Yeah, right now, your landscaping, and we'll talk about that, your landscaping is only focused on buffering. We did not do a lot of substantial changes to that, with the exception of, like, screening parking lots in downtown. Like, you would have to put a decorative fence up with some, arborvitae or something, just to, have something nice. But we do not have a lot of streetscape buffers for anything outside of downtown.
Eventually they'll come in. They gotta come in the city.
I think it ties in with the whole ODOT project over the next decade with that.
You know, we're in the process now of redesigning that whole interchange and then going out for construction dollars.
Well, and I think that's the easiest way to frame that discussion, is that you are looking at this as the private improvement requirements, whereas you are working on public improvement. So it's kind of a joint effort to make that, you aren't just putting it all on them.
Right.
Okay. All right, well, I will make that change. But any questions about the residential district? Because that's gonna be the biggest change here. I will work with Joshua in particular. I think I didn't spend a lot of time, because again, I had MS do this. I think some of this area in the south might really be
A lot of
R1.
that's single family homes
Yeah.
right now. And a lot of-
So we might refine some of those boundaries, but the big thing is that we're also trying to not create a whole bunch of non-conforming uses. Okay, and we'll fix all this weird right-of-way stuff. Okay. Other than that, we get into the principal uses, the purpose statements, but then obviously our big thing is the allowed uses. We have prohibited, right now you prohibit medical marijuana. I have refined that to be all marijuana. We don't know what the definitions of the state are, so the definitions of this are basically any marijuana dispensaries allowed by the state are not allowed in Philadelphia. Any marijuana cultivating, regardless of how they call it, define it, whatever, can't do it. And then you recall our big thing here is we have this lovely table now that will show you all the uses. This reflects a lot of the changes we discussed. The 3-family, 4-family, and row house addition you can see here. This is all stuff I added because we added that downtown residential district. So in that area that is adjacent to downtown, they could do a 3-family unit, a 4-family unit, and row houses. And then multifamily, just like in the R2, would be conditional. So they could come to you with something different, but it would have to be reviewed by planning commission. Other than that, I mean, this all kind of refines, all the changes are based on our discussions we went through. I have talked to Marvin about short-term rentals, and there's gonna be an attack at it from a zoning perspective, but mostly from a business regulations that he has sent me that. So that is one thing I have to incorporate in here, but I had had that discussion with him.
Okay, good.
We have the section on all of the use-specific standards.
Yeah, I think that's what they're doing.
Don't think there's anything that we changed. Public parking garage, lots of garages. This was something where I'd asked you is if somebody built a parking deck or a parking garage, if you would want some kind of architectural standards or design so that it was something more creative than just a box. So this is something where they could propose some level of decorative items just to, kind of build into it. if it's in the central business district, it has to go to the DRB. So they would also have a say in it based on our standards. I don't think we had a ton of changes to these. This was already built into it, the adaptive reuse of a pre-existing building. This is what I told you, where if somebody's got an existing building somewhere in a district that can't be used easily for how it's zoned, they could come to the planning commission. Wind energy. Oh, I have a technical question on that. Joshua or Marvin will answer that. This is just, we pulled that in. The downtown design overlay district, that will go away now, and I will change that to a West High overlay district. Planned unit developments. We did not have any changes to this, but if you'll recall, because you don't have any right now, this is where if somebody wants to do a large development that is something different than otherwise allowed in zoning, they could come to planning commission and council with their proposal. And we've designed this with different densities and different open space requirements based on certain things, like if it's next to downtown, you can have higher density, but you also have to have more improved open space. And then we have all these design standards that you would all be able to look at as part of so they would be coming to you with a zoning map amendment and essentially a big site plan for what it's gonna look like. And you would approve it or not, but if you approve it, then it's the same thing we had talked about earlier. They'll have a certain amount of time to build it, and if they don't, if, let's say, they go defunct or whatever, there's a certain period of time at which point that plan becomes void. So it's not a approved plan in perpetuity.
Well, if we approve it, or it's approved, after that moment, when the zoning amendment, will that change it from business to PUD?
Correct.
Okay.
So you are essentially doing a zoning amendment process with a plan attached to it. So then the zone will change to PUD with that approved plan. If they don't construct it, the plan could void, but the zoning doesn't automatically change.
Okay.
At that point, there's three options. The city can rezone it back to something. The applicant could ask it to be rezoned to general business or whatever it was. Or they can submit a new plan and go through the same process. And so, no matter what, planning commission and city council will always have a say in what would be approved, what plans are approved as part of a PUD. I have new pictures of those. Accessory uses and temporary uses. This is the one that residents will care about the most, because this is the one they want to know how they can build their sheds and their swimming pools. We've made a couple of adjustments based on some administrative stuff. One of the big things is we have a lot area calculation that the buildings would come into play. But then this table, like everything else, kind of shows how these uses would be allowed.
I got a question.
Yes.
On the table.
Yeah.
Like, when I just first glanced through it, it said like things like swimming pools do not count towards lot coverage, which we do now. But then I've seen further where you like spell out swimming pools, they have like size requirements and stuff. So are we not counting that stuff towards the total lot coverage for a specific zone, or?
So,
See you, Joe.
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Let us know if you have any comments. Like, this is I'm gonna go to the chapter that has all the lot requirements, because I think I may have to revamp that language, but with lot coverage for even residential, we have a maximum coverage by building and a maximum coverage by impervious surface.
Okay.
So the swimming pool would count towards impervious.
Service, okay.
But the point of, and I may just have to revamp this, the point of the lot coverage thing and the accessory is if it's a building or not. So does it count towards the building lot coverage, or does it count towards, and maybe that's what I just need to change that table, building or impervious. Because clearly an accessory building would count, but a pool is typically an impervious surface. I'm actually gonna make that note to do it that way. So with accessory dwelling units, we are allowing those, but I have made some adjustments based on the discussions we had, particularly related to utilities. So in order for these to be approved, whatever utility connections would have to be authorized. So if the utilities look at it and say we can't do this as like a joint sewer or something like that, then they wouldn't be able to do it. I also have established a minimum floor area for it of 300 square feet. Part of the reason of this is that I know there was, this is kind of meant to not necessarily defeat somebody putting a tiny home in their backyard, because we are requiring it to be permanently like sited. But 300 square feet is what most building codes recognize as a reasonable size apartment. Like for a studio apartment or something like that, 270, 300. So I kind of set a bare minimum that if you want to call it a dwelling unit, it's got to be 300 square feet.
And I thought I read, in Ohio, a tiny home, the minimum is 950, but I could have been wrong.
So that may be.
Because I get that question a lot. People are calling in saying, can I put a tiny home on this lot and how small can I go? And that's when I started like Googling stuff.
Yeah. Well, that is always, part of the question is how do you define a tiny home? So 900 square feet is not usually what a tiny home is defined as.
That's pretty good size.
I guarantee you probably have some homes that are 800, like single-family homes that are probably 800 to 900 square feet. There isn't, because I've done the research too, I haven't found a universal definition of what tiny home is because I think it's relative to the community. This would probably allow for something that could be considered a tiny home, but it would have to be in the rear yard and it would have to be taken off the chassis.
So since we don't, this is where,
But we also, in the next chapter on like the lot sizes and stuff like that, I've also established a minimum dwelling size that is intended to not try to, again, we're dealing with the housing crisis and housing cost. It's trying to avoid somebody being able to build a whole bunch of tiny homes like in a subdivision, but, you know, so I think it's 500 square feet or 600 square feet, which is not most tiny homes.
and that's, I guess, I just pulled up what I looked at. That's out in counties. It says, minimum state building code requirements in Ohio, minimum size is 950 square feet for permanent homes, but does not specifically identify tiny homes. So, and we don't have a certified building department that covers residential in this area, so
Correct.
we can't enforce anything anyways.
Right, except that in this case, you are not enforcing these minimum sizes by a building code. You're just saying, from our standpoint of zoning compliance,
We
it's
won't
gotta
allow
be,
it.
yes.
Okay.
So 300, you could get a tiny home in, but it would have to be accessory dwelling, it would have to be permanently mounted.
The only thing we do have is a housing code that it's so confusing. It's the city's housing code and it dictates certain rooms have to be certain sizes.
Correct.
And I don't know, I've never went through it and tried to add up what the,
We can, you and I can sit down, I think, and do that, because I'm not unaccustomed to that. And the 270 square feet I mentioned earlier comes from occupancy-based guidance like that, like, okay, you need so much square footage for a bedroom, and so much, you know, that kind of thing.
we
So
also,
that's- yeah.
we've got the International Property Maintenance Code as well. But we don't have, that's adopted into the city ordinances, but we don't have the International Residential Code, which probably spells that out. And I never checked to see if those two conflict each other, our local housing code and the International Property Maintenance Code on room sizes. Cause they only specify certain rooms like sleeping rooms and bathrooms, and then everything else is pretty much up in the air.
Yeah, and the last time I looked at the property maintenance code, it did not get to,
That's probably
I think
under
your
that.
housing code is more critical to this, so I'll work with you offline.
That's probably spelled out in that residential code. But we
But
don't have adopted.
here's the language I added, that even if they wanted to bring in like the trailer type tiny homes, they would have to do it where it's permanently anchored. So they can't just roll in a trailer and live in it. But these would be relegated to the rear yard. And again, this is a great way to allow something that people could find an affordable way to like house their kid or their grandparent or their parent.
Increase density a little bit.
But it's not one where we are seeing any community that allows them be overrun. Every once in a while I talk to the city of Cincinnati because they just allowed it in every residential lot, and as of like a month ago, they'd had like 12 applications since last September in all of Cincinnati. So it's not like everybody's running out to do these, but the people that are doing it usually for family. So we can't dictate that only family can live there. However, we have said that the owner of the property has to live in one of the units. So for that, part of that is most people don't want to rent their single family, the accessory. So most often not, that's going to trigger family living in the dwelling unit. I think the rest of this is all, we only had some minor changes. Again, a lot of this was modernizing things, trying to make Joshua's life a little easier, I hope. And just adding in some things that are pretty common, things like recreational courts, retail commercial uses for like manufacturing, and we see them in the public facilities districts, solar panels. These are not the solar farms, these are people's personal solar panels on their houses. And then we've got some baseline temporary use language. I had been asked to add provisions for food trucks. This is my page 91. So we have, this is some model language that I threw in here for your consideration. So what this does is try to allow for them without them becoming a permanent activity on a lot. Somebody just rolls up and that becomes the permanent food truck location. So what this comes down to is we kind of treat them a little, we kind of have, I've treated them in different ways, and all of this is subject to your policy discussions, okay? So we've got a type 1, which is what I grew up knowing as the roach coach, or, they show up at an industry or somebody, they're there for that company and people can get a coffee or whatever. So if they're showing up every day, but they're only hanging around for like less than 2 hours, then they can do that all year long. They get one zoning compliance review and it's okay. I have a type 2 where this might be something where they want to test run barbecue or test run something before, before they do something, or just see what the market is. Chick-fil-A does that sometimes, or some of the, like, they'll see how it goes before they open a brick and mortar. And again, this is all subject to change, but they could operate anywhere from the 2 to 8 hours, up to 60 days per calendar year. Now you could say we would let them operate for 4 months or whatever you want, but that gives them 2 months to, be on a particular site. Now, if they wanted to move sites, I think they could come in and ask for a different, permit in a different site, but this would keep them from becoming a permanent fixture. And then the type 3 is for events. So let's say the local church is having their festival and they want to have a food truck event or something like that. They could get that 4 times a year with this permit. Or, think of any type of event. Now, these rules would not apply to a public event. So if the city has a festival or something and they want to invite food trucks to line, or none of this would apply. This would be food trucks on private property. So again, this is where I'm seeking input of, is this too restrictive, not restrictive enough?
Well, it's became a problem since we started this, and the health department's asked for guidance or help with us to be able to make a move, because they're skirting around health code stuff.
So we do say they have to meet, we do require compliance with health codes.
And I think as long as we have it to
And
where
we
we
pro-
can make a move.
Yeah, and we've also prohibited in the central business district, because that's where most communities have a problem with, fighting with local restaurants that are downtown.
Right.
Because I can think of 3 right now that's planted and hasn't moved since they've opened. And that's what they're asking us to do, is have some kind of zoning thing, just so we can make a move. And I think a permit's the way to go, to be honest.
Yeah. And again, this could be one where if there, maybe again, I don't know the fancy term for it. I just remember growing up, everybody called it the roach coach. But, you might say, listen, as long as you're just showing up and we're not having an issue, you show up for 2, like maybe you don't even require them to come in a permit. You're like, listen, as long as you're not sitting there all day, we're not an issue. And we're just really trying to catch these people who are planting themselves in one spot and sitting there. So you may say, listen, we don't need those people to come in and independently get a permit, but if you're under 2 hours on a site every day, whatever, you're coming and going. And then it maybe becomes the other ones that you focus in on. So again, at this point, 60 days, they've got essentially 2 months to sit in a spot.
And further down, doesn't it say they have to remove it every night?
Yes.
So they can't just keep it there for 60 days? Or is that it further up?
I think I added that type 3. I think, yeah, so they can only be operational and removed or I would probably add this with the exception of, I would probably give one slight exception for the type 3. Because if you're there at an event, they may set up over 8 hours. We're saying you can be there for over 8 hours 4 times a year. So maybe maybe I refine that one to be like a maximum of 24 hours, and you don't have to move that overnight. That's a good.
Yeah, with the, Art on the Alley and even
Right, you don't wanna make a move each night.
Tuscarora Park, for Town Days. You wanna get technical, you could, make some of those food trucks move.
Yeah.
But Town Days would be our sponsored event, so you wouldn't need that, right?
Right, they're exempt from this.
Yes.
They're exempt from that, okay.
Yeah, I have made publicly held events, like city events or park events, they would be exempt from this.
Okay.
Because those are one-off occurrences. They're not gonna let that food truck sit there permanently.
Not like the guy in West High who playing it down now, he's got a 1201 West High sign on the side of his, he's not moving. That's what as long as I can tell those guys you gotta move, because they're not getting anything from us for setbacks or lot coverage, and they're taking up ground,
Mhm.
Plus skirting around fire code and health code. I forgot fire departments requested it too.
I bet.
The guy, still on Second Street,
It's just horseshit.
it used to be the doggy,
Like
gonna
by the
add
old
the-
quick print?
sits back, yeah, the old.
That's the one I was thinking, the guy that took Miller's on East High, that barbecue joint, and then the new one on West High by the new tire and brake shop. And then we've got a Hispanic one that's gonna set up on all their tienda on Union Avenue, the old cat shelter. That one's gonna, so, they're gonna keep coming, cause I've had people, like a lady from Yearsville saying, I'm closing down my brick and mortar to
Yeah.
do. If we don't tell them that they can't move, they're just gonna sit there.
State bars, I guess, if you.
And there are larger cities that have set up food truck parks,
Right.
where that they can be permanent fixtures. But I would say the majority of communities I've talked to or worked with have pushed back on them becoming permanent fixtures. They don't mind them testing out the waters, but they would prefer the brick and mortar.
Yeah.
Okay. So does that sound like it gives you the teeth you need?
Yeah, I think so. I think it'll help those who ask for help too.
Well, and you may end up saying, this could be one where you monitor it for a while, and you may come to say, you know what, we've had somebody ask 6 times a year, and you may adjust this over time. Any of these timings are really up to your policy discussion. There's no rhyme or reason. It's just trying to think about what is a reasonable accommodation of them versus when does it become, and if you just noticed, I did add in that they have to have the fire department review.
And that's, tweaking here, but instead of Tuscarawas County Health Department, we use our own city health department.
Okay.
To me, that lets us know what's going on,
Right.
that Josh knows that somebody doesn't call you up and say, hey, what's this food truck doing over
Well,
there?
yeah, that one on West High, I didn't know it was there until I went to get stuff from the new brake shop. And then I was like, what's that? And he's like, oh, no, they pulled up and he asked me if he could use the parking lot. I said, yeah. I said, well, they need stuff from us probably.
Is that by Aldi's?
Yeah, right next to Aldi's.
Yeah,
I haven't been down there in a while.
yeah, just pull it up there.
And cause then if they're permanent, we're not making income tax or anything off that, I
No.
wouldn't think, cause our department doesn't have any record of them setting up shop.
Yeah, that's,
We might as well be
Especially if
trying to
they
do it
make you
right.
pay in cash. Some of them do.
all right. I know we're nearing on 3, and it looks like some people are packing up.
Yeah.
Lost a few.
So, yeah, I know, well, I have June on my calendar, plus I think we're gonna have to, June might be when we have to initiate that amendment we were talking about, so we don't give you
Yeah.
notice. So, I can work with you and Joshua here for a little bit afterwards and,
Yeah.
and in between, but we'll pick up here in June, cause the rest of, other than this next chapter where we deal with all the lot standards, the rest of it, like landscaping, parking and stuff, you didn't have a huge amount of revisions for me, so I think we'll cruise through those. But it also let me work in that West High overlay, and figure out where we wanna add some landscaping. And I might be a little bit more restrictive on the signs in that corridor.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
So I already prohibited the big pole signs anywhere except, I think, 2,000 feet from the interstate, which, just so you know, that gets you to about Menards.
Okay.
I've looked.
Yeah.
All right, yeah, so I don't wanna keep you any longer, and we do have a lot, but I would, we have made some changes, but I would invite you to kind of take some time and look through that whole draft.
Right.
Reach out to me or the mayor or Joshua with any, like, questions or comments, cause the more we can clean this up, the quicker we'll move. I still think we're in pretty good shape to start sharing this, so this may be something we decide to do a nice, clean, not red line copy and say, hey, we're still kind of refining this, but this is where we're heading.
Yeah.
And I'll also here, work on kind of refining that zoning map based on what we've talked about already as well.
Yeah, that'd be helpful.
Okay.
Okay.
From my perspective, Wendy, this is exactly what I had envisioned.
Oh, good.
Thank you. Hopefully it's good for Josh, because he's the one that's gonna be working with it. But it really does give us a lot of guide. And it makes, to me, it's gonna make things easier.
Well, and you guys have been a joy to work with. I mean, I would tell everybody you're my favorite client, but you have been great to work with, and to be honest, it was pretty easy to get here because your code really was missing a lot of critical pieces. So it's pretty easy when you're starting, kind of with a fresh idea of just saying, what do you want? We'll write it however you want. That makes it pretty easy. But then having these discussions about just the central business district, is this what you really want for all of this area, or, that kind of thing, it's just part of this conversation. Plus, I think with all the master plan conversations, has led to some of this discussion about how can we make some of these improvements. Again, without this, none of this is meant to be overburdened on anybody. That you aren't a Hudson, you aren't a, you're not trying to, regulate every little thing, but this should hopefully over time make some improvements. Again, without creating a whole bunch of nonconformities.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yep.
So,
yeah, that.
Very good.
all right, well, we will
Thank
see
you.
you in June. This has been good.
Thank you. Move to adjourn, Dick Bible first,
So moved.
Billy Watson second, we're adjourned.
I'll go to baseball game, huh? Baseball, softball last night. My granddaughter started catching for those She's a sophomore. They're 24.
Well, I mean, setbacks could change.
That
I
requires
mean,
you.
right now, we allow it to go to the property line. But I know the one thing that's specifically about fences that was brought up by some of these guys, was a lot of cities will, like right now, we can allow 6 foot anywhere.
Oh, is it?
But a lot of towns do only 4 foot in the front yard because 6 foot looks, so it depends if you wanna do.
No, it's in the back,
So, I mean, I don't see,
inside,
It's sophomore.
tired of looking at my neighbors.
right, so for side and rear,
So
I'm
guys,
okay
thank
with
you.
6. I would like to personally see front yards go down to 4, so if you don't
Yeah,
wanna do
it
that,
sounded,
it looks nicer.
it looks nice, we're kinda in a front fenceless community.
If you go with 6 foot, I mean.
Are we
got a-
talking about the fences where you're
Yeah.
currently kind of
Yeah,
vague?
I wanna put a fence in my backyard, well, cause we're tired of looking at the neighbors and the side, so that's what we're on a Jordan Drive, and my dad put the original fence, and it's like 2 feet, 1.5 feet off the pavement on Jordan Drive. So I wanna make sure,
You can go, right now, you can go right up to the property line, except for a corner lot, we've got a special,
yeah.
It's not a s-
on the corner.
it's not a setback, it's a height limit for
Mhm.
the, for
Right.
site purposes. But I think, a couple of guys wanted to see maybe a setback off the side or rear.
So there's a couple, that's what one of the things I pointed out in the fence regulations, is there are a couple ways we can go at that, is some communities, I've got one community I'm just their contract planner. They have no fencing in the front yard, whatever, and I mean, they are, no fencing. That's pretty extreme. Most communities, however, I would say, don't allow for 6-foot fences
Well,
anywhere in the
that's-
front.
I'd
Now,
like to lower it for front.
so, but then the question becomes, required front yard or front yard? So that's where that language comes in to critical piece. So some communities say, let's say we've got the 25-foot front yard setback in like your current R district, right? So that is the required setback, front yard setback. But now your house might be 35 feet. So the question is, do you have a shorter fence requirement just for that 25 feet? So the first 25 feet of a property all have to be shorter? Or
whole
is
front
it
of
the
the house.
entire front yard has to be shorter? And so regardless of how far your house is set back, the 6-foot fence line only starts from essentially the front facade of that house and back.
I kinda like that.
It's easier to enforce.
We get so many fence permits. I mean, through my 3 years here, by some point at this rate, every yard in New Philly will have a fence. 'Cause
Yeah.
nobody likes each other. But if you have houses.
Or they don't wanna see their neighbor's
We don't
front.
wanna
Right.
see the garbage
Yeah.
pile up.
I don't
They
like.
have dogs.
Yes.
That was kind of a joke, but 6-foot fences on every front yard, to me, looks like a prison community
It
or
does.
something.
It's like a gated community and we don't have it.
So
There's only certain areas that could do.
in Mount Vernon, I'm working with them, we're just at the adoption phase, and, I think right now they only allow 3-foot fences in their front yard, but we actually changed that to be, if it's a solid fence, nothing can be more than 3 feet, cause that's not gonna contain your dog or anything. But you can go up to 4 if you have over 50% opacity, which means picket fence or that black aluminum, like fencing, the decorative fencing. That if you do something like that, you can have a 4-foot fence. But I would say the vast majority of communities that allow fencing in their front yards only allow 3 or 4 feet. 4 feet's a nice staple. You can go to Home Depot or Menards and get a 4-foot fence.
It's a little bit like if they gradually go to the side, it's less of a change going up to 6, so. I just think it looks nicer than 6-foot fence, because there's no setbacks, so it goes.
No, it just,
When you're walking on
you're
the
just like, you
sidewalk,
can have a
yeah,
6-foot fence, it's
Right
fine.
up to the sidewalk.
So that's one where there'll be some nonconformities, but probably for a good reason.
So that's what I was asking about, should I do my fence now?
Depends on what you wanna do.
Yeah.
Oh, just the back,
Yeah.
little back section,
No, we're not taking away the 6-foot fence in the back.
yeah.
And the
the
only thing
setback
that
on
could change would be setbacks, and I don't even know if that'll happen or not. They just mentioned it.
On the setbacks, the only thing I adjusted, like on building setbacks, was like in the new R2, which is really your R1, or your R. I reduced the front yard setback because a lot of your homes are not 25 foot back in your older parts of the
Those are a lot of
city.
the older neighborhoods right there. too.
Correct.
Yeah.
So we're making a little bit more conforming there. But even 25 feet's not terrible. That gets you a driveway with a car outside of the right of way. So yeah, I try to do things where I was spot checking on the auditors, GIS versus like I literally was like, what's the measurement here?
Okay, so I have the fence, I can do now, and then if we wanna add a master bedroom onto the front, we can wait.
I probably could do any of that now. I mean, as long as you're not, the front yard setbacks aren't changing, so as long as you meet your front yard setback now, you're gonna meet it in the
It has to
future.
be contingent with the neighbors, and they're more further out than we are, closer to the sidewalk than we are.
Then the way it reads now is you could go out to meet their requirement if it's an encroachment. You are allowed to go as
Right
far out
next
as your
door,
neighbors.
yeah.
And we're keeping that.
Yeah, we're
for
keeping-
continuity.
Yeah, we're basically
Okay.
saying if your neighbors are closer, you can meet the shallowest of the neighbors.
Yeah,
So yeah, that's not changing either.
that's not changed, okay.
And part of that is also gonna deal, you've got some cases where things are less than 10 feet. Okay, like the ones we were just looking at in the, what we might be at office transition, those were much closer than 10 feet.
Well, I got it. There's a couple areas I wanna talk about tweaking for what is zoned what.
Thank you.
Such as we've got I think I've said it to you guys before, there's a couple that are zoned industrial now that are just homes.
So what I'm going to do, I'm on vacation on Saturday, but what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get MS Consultants to send me the shapefile. And then I'm gonna like reduce the transparency so we can see, I'm gonna actually put it on the property line map and take away the aerial so that you can see how they line up a little bit easier. And I will get that to you before then. So you can, because I figured there are probably some, like I said, I'm going through this Mount Vernon. They sent me a Excel sheet of 185 properties that are like, we need to tweak these.
Okay.
They had been tracking them like, yeah, we turned this manufacturing place into a park, so we can
Yeah.
make that public facility, so we can, there were certain things that had, over the years, just not been changed, and they were like, we know there's a two-family there, why don't we just acknowledge it?
Like you said, the south side, a lot of that is R1. There are a couple areas that already have a couple duplexes, but there is a big chunk that there is none. And I know that was one of the main things people came to us about is, why can you build a duplex in my neighborhood basically when it's all single-family homes? So if we can, get more R1 tweaked out in some of that as well. And I got a specific one on West High where we were just talking where in between Fifth Street and Fifth Drive, this just came up yesterday. A guy wants to, where the old, not old, but it's like a strip in the very end spot where Diamond in the Rough just was,
Yeah.
and they moved out. He's thinking about doing a skilled gaming thing there. Well, I thought that was all business. Well, here, that half a block is actually office district, and all of those businesses in there are non-conforming. So I didn't know if we just want to make that half a block business instead of office transitional, or I'd have to look at the new definitions for office transitional to see, because we've got like,
Well, so the office transitional, the only thing I think I tweaked in that is it's probably focused on non-retail stuff, but also allowing for residential so that it can go back and forth as to whether it's residential or not.
because I don't know if you can see this. This is a strip of businesses, and that's a strip.
Yes, I actually know that.
Yes.
Yeah,
So that's what he wanted to go in, and I told him, well, by code, you can't put one there because it's only dental offices, this office, that, and then I started thinking, none of those are all non-conforming. We shouldn't have allowed any of those in the past several years. So I didn't know if we just wanted to change that, or.
I think this is the best time to do that.
Since it's all, it would fit in a business more than office, in my opinion.
Right.
Well, and we've got cases where along that entire corridor, it's jumping from the neighborhood to the regional. And, I think part of it is looking at what's in place and is that gonna really change? And if it's not, then maybe it's okay to make it regional or,
West High is in my opinion, the most likely to change all to business because.
but the question is what scale of business? So I think most
Right.
of it is business, although in the office transitional, we allow for residential to coexist. But we have the three categories of business now, so we have office transitional, which is primarily, like, again, things that are not retail. We have neighborhood business, with the implication of that is that it can be retail, but it's a smaller scale. And part of that, I think, is more based on the property sizes being limiting factor, not so much. So, that may be one where we need to add a maximum floor area so that people don't consolidate a whole bunch of those properties in hopes they can build a Menards or, anything like that.
Well, and that's what, there's a strip down West High from about, where's Simpson's Heating and Cooling, 9th, 10th, 11th, those blocks. The guy who owns that have bought up a bunch of those houses, and he's already told me, he's torn one down. Eventually, those are all gonna come down so he can do commercial properties. And then just another half a block up, another one of our, two landlords that own a lot of properties, and the same thing, they bought 5 of those houses, and they're gonna, so that's what I meant, is a lot of those homes that are residential houses right now are not gonna be for too much longer.
And that's fine, but my thing, like I said, is, do you want that to be big regional
Right,
stuff?
that's some type of business, I just don't know which
Right,
yet.
right, or, I mean, and when you say neighborhood business, that still could be a McDonald's, something of that scale, but you're not getting the big box.
Right, the region, I doubt it would be, and that's
And
kinda neat
honestly-
how West High goes, from central to office to, it kinda like just gets bigger and bigger as you go out towards the highway.
Well, and I think now looking at it in hindsight, I think one of the things that, there may be some area of those smaller lots that are regional, the dark red, that we might wanna just make the neighborhood business district to keep it from transforming too much. Cause in those cases, they would have to vacate streets to be able to get a big
Right,
property,
right,
but
right.
still.
I think the big property, I mean, he would know better and it's all up in the air, but it was gonna be on the other side of the interchange.
Yes.
That's potentially gonna be another regional area, cause that land's all been, they've excavated and they're getting it prepped for some big stuff to go.
It's gonna be mixed use. There'll be, probably Target is the anchor store.
Hmm.
And then the
I don't think
stores,
people have
the retailers that follow Target
Yeah,
will be located there, and in the back end will be some residential, like condos and some single family mixed in probably. And there might even be a piece of light industrial in it.
And just that ODOT project, they're looking at from the interchange redoing it so it's better. All the way up to Bluebell Drive where you go back to go to Menards and stuff, that's all,
Yeah.
gonna be re-looked at, cause, I mean, not this administration, but administrations in the past never enforced our road access management, so you got 15 in and outs in a very small, and it's a mess down there. So they're trying to incorporate that, the future development and everything to try to make it a whole better, so when we do that's why I was like, yeah, let's do an overlay, because that's gonna be big.
Yeah.
I'm gonna-
Well, and, you know, it needs to be, that's the gateway roadway into town, period.
Yeah, 77, 250.
And it needs to be as attractive as it can be.
well, and one of the things I can do with regards to access management is in that overlay district, I can add some general access management principles that, basically, if you've got 2 openings now and you wanna redevelop a site, you're gonna have to drop one unless you are a huge site, that basically we really enforce driveway separation distances in that redevelopment kinda
Did you get
area.
that document that a couple weeks ago? It was a road access management
Mhm,
document.
yes, yeah,
The
yeah.
city incorporated that in 2008. That, in the past, the torches weren't passed very well. I just happened to stumble across that, and I talked to Ron, I'm like, this is something, it's not in our code, but it's something we should be doing. Listen, I don't know if it's outdated or not.
Let me take a look at it in more depth, but, even if it's outdated to some degree, as long as we can point to something
Well, it does too. It
that
goes
can
to
be
different-
like, listen, it doesn't have to be adopted by ordinance per se, but if it's, ordinance, well, the zoning ordinance, but if the city could adopt it as a plan and a policy.
And I'm glad that they did in 2008.
Okay, so then if that's it, we can just cross-reference that as an adopted policy that you have to comply with.
I'll have to double check, make sure it went through and was passed by, Larry cause Larry worked at the county for 25 years.
Yeah.
He said that's the same year they did that county-wide, was these accidents, so he said Philly probably just copy and pasted it. And it does refer to volume levels through a certain ODOT guide and something else. But I just don't know if some of that's outdated, cause like right now, I remember like a driveway access has to be a minimum of 130 feet away from the center of an intersection. Well,
Mhm.
a lot of you're like 20 feet from, in a lot of neighborhoods, so moving forward, I didn't know if that stuff's outdated and things have been switched.
So I know from past discussions that that's probably not outdated from the standpoint of that's
Okay.
the desired separation. However, the reality is you've got smaller lots than what they're envisioning this happens. And so every lot has to be given access, don't get me wrong. So you're gonna have somebody who doesn't have an option to close an access point. And at this, you know, again, you're at a point where Anderson Township, where I grew up, has Beachmont Avenue, which was this kind of nightmare when I was growing in high school, learning to drive. Access ways everywhere. And as a township, they didn't have a lot of authority, but what they did is they also, not only did they enforce, like access management through ODOT, but they also put pretty strong requirements for cross-access easements, so that basically, if you could force somebody to close it, if they could get a cross-access easement to take access from the neighboring.
Okay.
And so, they don't have a lot of front, because they couldn't get the frontage streets in. So what you find now is like, a lot of it's kind of built up like your Menards and stuff like that. You can literally like go in and target, and I can probably go half a mile down using their connected parking areas.
Okay. But it clears up some of the congestion on
Right.
on the street.
So a lot of the outlots had to close their access and take cross-access out behind to parking lots and the bigger developments driveways.
And that's what we do with, just having with Petco and Menards. Petco's access is through Menards.
Right.
They might, when they bought that outlot, they may have purchased, I don't remember exactly, but that discussion at least came up. I mean, to me, I think of that as like the strip up in North Canton and stuff, where there's all those places. But with the traffic we're getting now, I mean, I'm 40, from the time I grew up, the traffic, I lived in Dover, a sister city, for 16 years and just moved back, and when I was in Dover, I didn't come over here too much. And then now that I'm like, I can't believe the frickin' traffic, like the population is just so much, and Dover's their main drag's got a lot of traffic too, but we've got so many areas here that are just crazy, cause the population has boomed, I think.
Well, and I tell you, every time I come through here, it's funny, I almost now, it's comical because I can guarantee I'm behind at least one, if not two trucks, semis.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Today I was behind one that was like taller than I'd ever seen, I was just like, oh.
Once we get the KSU connector bike path built this year, we've already talked to ODOT, we're gonna create a truck route to take a lot of the truck traffic from.
It'll benefit the downtown so much.
Yeah, I'm dealing, you know, I'm working in Marietta on their comp plan and their zoning, and one of the things they're working with ODOT is, cause they have the same thing, that the only way through on the state route is to go right through downtown.
Yeah.
And they have to make a terrible right angle turn into downtown in Marietta. And so they've been desperately working with ODOT to connect 77, with a road, a state highway north of the city to get them to cross there
Mhm.
and get them out of there.
Well, we have 250 that is underutilized by
Oh,
truck
yeah.
traffic, particularly if you have to make deliveries on the east side of town.
Yeah, I've been on that, yeah.
Yeah.
Huh.
Which is nice for us, cause we got 3 access points to 250. And it's spread out nice and even.
Yeah.
Like, I agree, underutilized. But again, before Mayor Day came on, there wasn't much like forward thinking, in my opinion, of the cities.
No.
Like, this is the actual work being done to try to correct some stuff before it was.
But that's why it's been, this has been kind of fun for me to work in, because everybody's been very open to new, I'm not getting as much pushback as I once did, which has been a kind of as a planner.
Yeah.
Now that I've been doing this for 28 years, like if I had mentioned, even breathed the word accessory dwelling unit or multifamily, my God, if I had mentioned that with most of my communities 10 years ago, I mean, get out the pitchforks. And now everybody's like, well, that's not a bad thing.
Mhm.
It brings people.
That's
Not
right.
everybody wants to live in a house.
That's right.
You know, and so it's been, to me, this kind of open discussion's been refreshing. It's like, okay, now I remember what I did this
Yeah.
for.
Yeah.
But what I'll do here is, this week, I will get a zoning map like that one with the parcel lines and the colors instead of the aerial to you.
Okay.
So you can all start looking. I will go ahead and, before I even send it, readjust the central business district and give you what I think might be an idea. But if you can take a look at that and see where, like you said, Joshua, you've got some areas that you might want to tweak, that would be great.
Not a lot, but there's some. I think the biggest area would be just the R2 to R1, but
Yeah.
there's a few that I think shouldn't be industrial, in my opinion.
Oh, I have, yeah, I have no doubt there's
Now,
some of them.
I'm glad you brought that up again. What about, where'd you get the most current, like, are we sure that everything's on there that's actually in the city now? Cause I know we haven't had a lot of annexations in the past year, but since I've been here, there's probably been over a dozen. Of usually single family home properties coming in.
Am I 100% sure? No. Larry sent me the mapping that was most recent.
And he should have that then.
And I think he sent that to me in November. So now, does that mean, do I hold every GIS map to be correct?
Right.
No, obviously, it's showing right-of-ways as residential in the middle of commercial. So we're gonna have to deal with that, but that's just cleanup.
Cause a lot of the our local GIS map, parcel numbers that start with 43s, ours, but there's also some other parcel numbers that begin differently that's ours, and he taught me a lot, which is, those are tax identifier numbers for where the dollars go for this. So if we've got people that live in Philly, but the taxes go to Tusky Valley School District or Indian Valley, then they start with like an 82 or something. So before I thought, well, that's an 82, that's not in Philly. And he's like, yeah, it is.
Yeah,
So he's been great to have from his experience over at the county, because he built that GIS map.
yeah. So, he sent it to me, and that's what we base that off of.
So this should be pretty accurate.
Yes. Now, would I double check the edges just to make sure? Yeah. Because again, that's GIS is accurate as they make it to be, and things, I've been in some, and if you really zoom in, you're like, okay. I don't think that's supposed to be there, or that's supposed to be to the center line. There's some
Right.
weird things like that,
He
but
admits that. He said if we couldn't figure it out, we had a timeline. We kind of did our best guesstimate off of surveys and
Right.
went forward.
so I will send that to you, and yeah, if you could take a look at that. I think the biggest thing is talking to Marvin, and like I said, I think we need to make that change, otherwise the notification's gonna be crazy.
Yeah, I agree, Wendy.
So I would talk to him about maybe initiating that, because what we can do is then at the planning commission in June, they can,
Approve the language?
yeah.
Yeah,
Again, I gave him the language, just add this, as it's just an exception that said,
Yeah.
if there's more than 10 properties subject to the zoning, your zoning tax, we could change the zoning tax now. But because we have to change the zoning map with it, that's where we're in trouble.
right.
So I think if you just put that one line I gave him, I only copied him because it's legal, then we can get that started so that we'll be ready to go when he gives us the clear on that.
Okay.
It happened in Xenia too, and they found that out like right at the last minute. We didn't even think about it. It was like, okay,
Yeah,
that's good.
I bet we would have missed that too if you
Yeah.
didn't bring it up, because it's a
We meet
minor
with him
thing.
every Thursday, so I'll put that on the to-do.
I sent it to him this weekend when I was going through and just reviewing stuff. The other thing I will send, and I'll copy both of you on all of these emails, is, I will go ahead, I'm gonna pull the downtown design overlay district out and just really quickly rework the basics of the West High overlay. But I think this is probably good enough where I can put a disclaimer on the front of this saying we are still working through additional refinements. But if you wanna go ahead and post that without red lines and stuff like that, that you could do that. And then I'll see about really quickly turning around a memo that's just like, hey, highlighting conditional uses of this, we're allowing accessory dwelling units, and we're
Mhm.
cleaning up setbacks, and give people some things to chew on if they really wanna read an ordinance.
Yeah, yeah.
There'll be a couple.
Some do,
Some do, I get it.
yeah.
I think overall it should benefit the town overall and the people in
will.
it, so.
And then the other thing, if you didn't read the signs yet, I did talk to Marvin and, I'm sorry, what's her name, the assistant law director?
Heidi.
Heidi. I had them both on the phone. We did talk about the temporary signs, and their preference was to go with the completely content neutral.
Safer one?
Right.
Yeah, I figured.
I wasn't surprised. I advocated for both. I'm like, listen, I have no heartburn, whichever way you go. This is the risk, this is not. I mean, hopefully somewhere here in the next year or two, we get another court case that will give us something back.
Yeah,
But until then, he'd rather not. First Amendment is a big risk because you're gonna end up paying. But, I basically upped the allowance to 40 square feet. I think honestly, during this'll all probably be effective before you hit, the November election. I think you're just gonna have to turn a blind eye unless somebody's complaining, cause there's no way you're gonna be out there counting, do you have 40
Micromanaging,
square
yeah.
feet?
And then I'll get shot and they'll need somebody to do my job anyhow,
Right.
so.
Yeah, there's just gonna have to be that, kind of like now you can't enforce some of it, there's just gonna have to be some blinders.
Yeah.
But I think 90% of the year it will work. So.
That's good, 90% is good.
For fees, I know that's up to us to determine, well, I got two questions about permits. Are we gonna have, like in our current zoning code where it says, you need permits for these jobs, or should that be in the building code section? Cause I know.
Permits for which jobs? When you say jobs, what are you talking about?
Like a permit to build a house or add a porch or anything,
So,
cause right now it's in the zoning code,
it is still in the zoning code.
Okay.
We call it that zoning compliance review because you had said you don't really have a zoning permit.
No, we have building permits, but we
Right.
really only do zoning reviews on the permits.
So we have the vague language, I use the term, because you're not the only people that do it that way. So I use the term zoning compliance review, because what we basically say is if we say you need zoning compliance review and you need a building permit, it's done simultaneously. So we look at your zoning when the building's being reviewed.
Right.
If it doesn't, like a home occupation or a small storage thing, then it's kind of up to you, how you would issue. Some communities just do a letter that says, you're good.
Or a
Or,
section on the permit.
or you could issue them a permit, whatever. So we've kind of stayed quiet
Okay.
on how you are saying they're okay, but we are saying you have to come. So you might want to set up, maybe it's not a permit, but an application for things that will be subject to review outside of building permit.
And we have that now, the certificate of zoning compliance.
Okay.
And what, the other thing I was getting towards is, we desperately need to increase our fees. So do most cities, when they're doing this, can we just like add that in as attachment, saying these are gonna be the new fees as well?
So
way
that
council can
is,
pass it all
that
on.
is the thing that will come out of the code. So that is something that city council should adopt as an ordinance outside of planning and zoning. So that in a year, if you wanna up them, you don't have to go through zoning amendment. That's where everybody's putting them, so you would have just and it could include everything, not just planning and zoning, it could be in your housing code,
All
anything like
fees
that.
across
All
the
your
board.
fees are in a fee ordinance. This is the time to assess, but it doesn't have to be embodied in this code.
Okay, like, could it be an attachment when we're running, I understand they've gotta be separate, but can we do them both like simultaneously?
You
for-
could, it doesn't have to, the
When they go
ordinance,
through
it does not
council?
have to go through planning commission. But
Yeah.
you could, when it goes to council, because they'll have to do the same, I'm assuming the same 3 read, you could basically, when you get to council, run a similar ordinance process. It won't have to have the public hearing, I don't think, like
No.
zoning, but you could simultaneously change them at the same time.
A couple of them, we literally get laughed at.
Yeah.
I've been laughed at.
Well. you
That
give
is
it
the
to us
time-
And you give it to the service
And I've
director.
got my research already done on different
All right.
cities and stuff, but
And
my
then-
main one is the variance. Because
Wait.
and we've got a couple tiny villages here where ours is $30 to go from the BZA.
So it's worth asking for it, cause
Right.
what's the worst?
Well,
I'm
we
gonna
got
lose 30
tiny
bucks.
villages that are $150 and $250
Yeah.
on purpose to say that's less variances coming at us, because we don't want variances.
Well, on top of which is you've got to pay for it. In theory, part of that is your time to review it. Now, that's
And
hard
Our
to,
fees don't cover any of that.
that's hard to quantify, but
That's
it's
right.
not just about notice and it's not just about trying to avoid them to do it, but there is a time that you expend
Right.
that those fees help pay for your salary.
Yeah, because I usually gotta drive out and do measurements and stuff like that.
Take pictures.
Yep.
Exactly.
Plus the paperwork and all that good stuff.
I think going back to the zoning compliance review question, because I think this is interesting, because you do have this, I think you may have mentioned this, and maybe this is somewhere I can clarify some stuff. So so we do have in here when you need zoning compliance review. And, and we do say, like, home occupations, yes, that, in the accessory uses, we have zoning compliance review, yes or no. So we do have those thresholds in there. In the procedure, we kind of say, if you've got a building permit, it's done this. I guess the question is it really that bifurcated where I could literally say there's two approvals you've got, either one of two approvals you're gonna have to get that would demonstrate zoning compliance review, approval. Building permit, if your building permit's approved, we've assumed you've gone through the zoning compliance.
Built-in.
Or you have a certificate of zoning compliance. If you don't have one of those, you have not achieved zoning compliance review. Is that straightforward, I guess?
Yeah, and I like it that way, cause the ones that don't require, that aren't building, like the change of business is always a
Yeah.
big one, cause I'm chasing those people down all the time.
Because we very clearly say that is something you have to come in and get zoning
Because
compliance.
that's affects income tax, cause we pass those along to them monthly whenever we got a business switch. Cause then they wanna know, if anything, it's informational to income tax, so they know that a new business, cause on our certificate of zoning compliance, we ask what type of business, owner information, how many employees, that kind of stuff. We're trying to find some of our, cause these departments never used to speak to each other,
Mhm.
and don't know what each other do. So I went down to the old income tax administrator and talked to her, and we talked to health, and what we're trying to do is a city hall, our own like cover sheet that says,
Mhm.
this one's been checked.
Yeah.
You've been to everything, so now we can call and say, you're ready to go, everything's been good. Water billing's a big one.
I'm trying to make sure that this, this is the fun part of my job, is I'm always trying to play devil's advocate and say, where can people be sneaky? But what are the loopholes? And where do we want the loopholes? Like the alternative, we want to encourage people to do something creative. Like where can we allow loopholes with some level of predictability or like some check, that you're reviewing it? So this is where I want to make sure that people are abundantly clear. When we say you have to get a review, this is what you mean. And that's why I was asking, like, zoning permit, like, a lot of times when you say you have to have a zoning permit, it's very clear, I gotta have something, right? The other way we can do it to make this sound more this is where I get a little uncomfortable with zoning compliance review, that terminology, because it's like, well, I got you to review it. And I use the term zoning compliance review approval a lot too, but there's no formal feeling that you've gotten something, which is why I like the idea of either keeping the zoning compliance review language in there and saying proof of that approval is either a building permit, an approved building permit, or approved certificate of zoning compliance. The other way we can do it is I can call it a certificate of zoning compliance, and in the introduction say that is either accomplished through building permit approval, meaning building approval equals certificate of zoning compliance review, or you have a standalone zoning or certificate of zoning compliance review, in which case we're pointing to a certificate or a permit or.
That's kind of how we've been doing it. I think that way for the ones that aren't building anything, they're not getting a permit, because I think the way I read it that's in our code now is a certificate of zoning compliance had to be attached to you did your building permit and you did that. So there were
Right.
separate fees and everything like that. But it's never been done that way. The only thing they're using the certificate of zoning compliance for is things that aren't being built, the change of business or signage because really when I'm doing if someone applies to build a duplex, during that permit, they're providing where they're putting it. I'm already doing the zoning review because I'm checking setbacks and if the use is allowed in that zone and all that good stuff. So either way, we can do it.
I would suggest, from, again, loophole and people trying to be cute, I would suggest we go back to calling it certificate of zoning compliance. But up front, in that procedural section, say, there's two methods of getting this certificate. One is if you are required to simultaneously get a building permit, your certificate of zoning compliance is reviewed at the same time and is issued as part of the building permit. Basically, basically noting you don't get a separate certificate in this case. Everything else, where we require a certificate of zoning compliance, you will get a formal document, a certificate of zoning compliance, whatever it is.
Right.
Because we already have built in there also that a certificate, this is where, again, having a certificate or permit language comes in handy, is we also have a caveat that that review procedure can be used for things that are called something else, but are the equivalent of. So if you had a sign permit, or a fence permit, or something like that, like a sign permit may or may not require building permit. Fence permit probably does, you know, but you can have different terminology mean the same thing. And so we can say, listen, the city will tell, you know, this is how you will confirm that you've got zoning compliance review.
Right, because I've heard some people believe that we should have an actual certificate we issue to the, like, businesses, where it's, here's your health certificate, here's the zoning one. That way, like, if the health guy comes in and they don't see the certificate of zoning, they can call us and be like, hey, do you know that business here, blah, 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 but.
I don't
To
see,
me-
a lot of people don't do that, but the variation I see is that, you know, you call it whatever you want, zoning permit, zoning certificate of compliance, whatever. And it basically, the way they treat it is that it's a building permit sign off from zoning, from the code administrator, equals a certificate of zoning compliance.
Right,
Or there is a separate zoning, or there is a separate certificate.
Right.
But there is some formal documentation that you have been approved.
right. Because, yeah, because
Yeah,
if
with
they've
your
got the
signature
approved
on it.
permit,
That's what, we ultimately, that's why I use the term approval, but it's nicer to say certificate, only because that implies a piece
It's
of paper.
certified,
right.
Yes,
in our building permits now, we have that stuff checked on there, like, we'll check off that the building setbacks were met, lot coverage was met, which is all the zoning requirements for that project.
so I think I think I would rewrite it as certificate of zoning compliance, and then and basically say, it's one of two things. It's either you get a building permit approval, that implies that is equal to a certificate, all in one,
Right.
or you have a standalone
And
certificate.
that's kind of what we do now, so I mean, our office is good with that, 'cause that's
Okay.
what we're already doing.
Okay.
Whatever's simplest and gets it done, because these projects, you know, with stormwater itself is becoming such an animal with us holding things off. Our engineering consultants wanted us to have a document that we can say, we're not gonna sign off on that, because we've got a lot of people that are refusing to cooperate until we put our foot down.
Yeah.
So there's things that, I mean, we got our own ordinances with it, but,
Well, and that also allows me to then do the mobile vendors, instead of it being a separate permit, I will call it certificate of zoning.
Yep, that would work.
So you don't have, we don't cause more confusion.
50
But there
different
is something that
applications.
is signed, and, maybe one of the things I will say in mobile food vendors is, you have to post a certificate.
Yes.
Maybe that's an easy one where you want that, because we are tying that you have to show that you're compliant with health and you're compliant with fire.
Right, because they're so easier to sneak in and out.
Well, and it also shows that they've been touched by city government.
Correct. So I can add that they have to post that in a
Mhm.
prominent place. Wrong page.
That would be helpful for Zach
Yeah,
Health
and Schultze too.
and Schultze, yeah, so that they could both see, oh, okay. Well, at least they've seen Josh.
And that's what we're trying to get the city as a whole more cohesive unit.
And
Instead
Wendy,
of-
there's gonna be more of that in this town, because we've got more people coming across the border, they're ending up here, and they're, one of the businesses they open's a food truck.
Mm-hmm. It's more cost effective than brick and mortar. And,
Yeah.
it's not bad to, like we said, we're trying to give them an opportunity to test the waters, but it's not meant to be a permanent solution. Now, does that mean they can't go out to the county somewhere and set it up? I mean, that's,
Well, sure they can.
Go ahead.
But what they try to do is set up in neighborhoods
Yeah.
where they know, Latinos are living.
yeah.
Like, for instance, we're starting to get Cubans here.
Hmm.
So I'm waiting for a Cuban food truck to open. I love Cuban food.
I mean, if they got a mojito to go with it.
Yeah.
But for our size area, we do have a significant Hispanic population.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it just keeps growing.
Yeah.
I think I've said before, our sister city Dover's where my kids go, and 18% was Hispanic 2 years ago. That's probably grown a little bit. So that's almost 1 in 5 kids. Which is, I mean, I don't have a problem with it.
It's about 9% here.
They had, I mean, they're doing business, they're opening up shops, and most of the ones I've dealt with, except for a couple, they just don't know what to do, and as soon as they do, they comply.
Oh,
They
yeah.
don't want any trouble.
All right, well, I will send you those things this week, and we'll kind of work back and forth to get this as fine-tuned as possible. I think the next planning commission, especially if they can initiate the one text amendment, so we're
Yeah.
not notifying
I
everybody.
think that'd be
Cover
That will be enough to finalize it, and then while that makes its way through council, we'll have a public meeting to give everybody the opportunity to talk about this, if they really, I can't say that I've ever had, a big show, but we'll give them the opportunity. And then, I bet we'll get some downtown folks in
Yeah,
the
oh,
downtown,
yeah.
that kind of thing, but then we should be ready to go. And by that time, hopefully we'll have solved the public notice thing.
Yeah.
Again, I think all of this is probably, I'm gonna guess, is based off a model code that existed at some point years ago.
Sure,
And,
yeah. A lot of our codified ordinances are cut and paste
yeah,
from somewhere else.
well, and it's not, a lot of, I've told you, the mobile food vendor stuff, a lot of